Rumors continue to swirl that the Rangers could look to trade Chris Kreider and or Jacob Trouba, but could somebody like K'Andre Miller or Ryan Lindgren also be a possibility? Plus, we explain why Laviolette should not be on the hot seat.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1191 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, like I said, part two of a two-parter here that's actually still Tuesday, right around 4:45 p.m. And going to record another episode, and this will be live either later tonight here on Tuesday or at some point on Wednesday. But either way, obviously a lot to still talk about with this team. Like I said in part one of what I'm considering a two-parter here, there was just too much to get through, way too many things to discuss in the last episode to contain it to only one, 30 or 35-minute episode, whatever it ended up being. So want to continue basically just picking up where we left off in the last one. Got some more thoughts and some news on Jacob Trouba that stems from an optional practice that the Rangers conducted a little bit earlier here today on Tuesday. The Rangers had an optional practice, and I think it's important to list everyone who attended this practice. And I'm going to elaborate on why in just a minute here. But for starters, let's do the roll call here. It's a pretty well-attended optional practice, as it should be, based on how this team has been playing recently. But these are the players who were there that were on the ice for the Rangers for this optional here today. You had Panarin, Lafreniere, Hedl, Smith, Vesey, Edstrom, Berard, Carrick, Brodzinski, Trouba, Lindgren, Schneider, Ruhwedel, Shesterkin, and Quick. And as I pointed out on Twitter a little bit earlier here today, or Tuesday, depending on when you're listening to this, the Rangers have 6 players right now that wear letters. They do it on a rotational basis. Trouba's the captain, and there's 5 alternate captains. Of those 6 players that wear letters, a grand total of 2 of them attended this optional practice. That was Artemi Panarin and Jacob Trouba. And keep in mind, this is one day after the 5 players that wear letters that played in that game against the Blues. Only one of the 5 of them made themselves available. Panarin made himself available. Kreider wasn't playing. He was hurt, if you believe that he's hurt. But after that game last night, no Trouba, no Trocheck, no Fox, no Mika, and none of those players except for Trouba showed up for this practice here either. And, we can debate how important this is because, hey, you know what? It's an optional practice, right? And I got to give a shout out to Eddie. We always talk some hockey on Twitter. He's kind of an OG listener of Locked On New York Rangers. So big shout out to him for always, being here and talking hockey with me and supporting this show over the years. Big shout out to all you guys, whether you're a old school listener, whether this is your first episode, whatever it might be. It's been really cool to put together this, little Ranger community that we have going on here. But Eddie basically pointed out on Twitter that what I just said, basically, it is indeed an optional practice. And whether we like it or not, if it's an optional practice, then it's up to the players whether they go or not. Eddie also pointed out in his response to me that certain players might be getting treatment. They might be banged up. Maybe there's a maintenance day for some of these players, possible off-ice work as well. These are all valid points. Eddie is not wrong about any of these things. So I will adjust what I said on Twitter regarding the players that wear letters that did not show up here. If any of those things that we just covered there applies to Trocheck or Fox or Kreider or Mika, then okay. If they had a scheduled maintenance day, if one of them or multiple players here are banged up or they're doing something away from the rink, then okay, fine. No harm, no foul. It's okay. We move on. However, if any of those players, and we might never know if this applies or not, but if any of those 4 players simply chose not to go because they just couldn't be bothered, they just didn't feel like it, they just wanted to stay at home or do something else, say, then that's not okay. That's not acceptable. I have never, we're approaching 1,200 episodes here. I have never once critiqued a player or criticized a player for not attending an optional practice because, again, it's in the title. It is optional. You do not have to do it. But when things are in the state that they're in right now, when you've lost 3 in a row, and it's not just a 3-game losing streak. The Rangers have been abysmal in all 3 of these games. The game against Calgary doesn't look so bad on paper because, hey, 3-2, close game, could have gone either way. You know what? The Rangers stepped on the gas for about 15 seconds in that game. They had the 2 goals right in a row in the second period there. They played a decent third period as well, but they deserved to lose that game, and they definitely deserve to lose the 2 games that have followed since then. So again, I do not usually care about optional practices, but when things are going the way that they're going, unless you have a very, very valid reason as to why you shouldn't be out there, injury, banged up, off ice work, whatever it might be, fine. If that's the case, then you get a pass. If none of those things are true, if you just didn't feel like going, not okay. Not after the way the Rangers played last night, not after the way that some of these guys have played, and not for a team that really needs some leadership right now. They need some guys to step up and motivate the troops, so to speak. So as for Trouba, to kind of continue talking about him here, some interesting quotes a little bit earlier here today on Tuesday. Trouba mentioned that he has not talked to Chris Drury since the reports broke that the Rangers might be open for business and specifically might be open to trading either Jacob Trouba and or Chris Kreider. But this is what Trouba had to say about the situation. It's part of the business. I'm happy to be here and focus on playing hockey. Can't really control that. Trouba was then asked if he would accept a deal to a team that is not on his no-trade list. And he said, that's how it works. So a lot of these quotes here were posted by Vince Mercogliano, and I'm sure he's busy right now. I'd love to have Vince back on the podcast, and we definitely will at one time or another. But I can't even imagine how much is on the plate of any of these New York Ranger beat reporters right now. But, Vince posted some of these quotes, and then he responded to a couple of people that had responded to what he posted on Twitter. And he mentioned that Trouba, because, the question that this begs here is if Trouba's willing to accept a trade now to one of the teams that's not on his list, what was going on during the summer when it was rumored that he might be on the move and might end up getting traded to the Detroit Red Wings. Vince mentioned here that Trouba didn't necessarily say that he would not report to a team that traded for him, but it was made very clear by Trouba that he would be very unhappy if he was traded for family reasons, which I can understand to a certain extent. But by that same token, these guys are professionals, and if it's not in your contract that you have a full new move clause, then you just have to roll with what happens. I'm sorry, but that's the reality of the situation. So apparently, when these teams got the knowledge, the teams that are interested in Trouba got the knowledge that he might not be so happy, so keen to go somewhere else. It sounds like that might be what caused these teams to back off, which paints a little bit better of a picture than Jacob Trouba just outright saying that he's just going to refuse to report to a team that trades for him. Now, of course, we don't know if all this is true or not. This is just going by what Jacob Trouba says here. But if that is true, if that is the case, that at least paints a little bit better of a picture for Trouba. But look, you can't worry too much about feelings. This is a cold business, and players get traded all the time. And if the Rangers want to trade Jacob Trouba, then I feel like they have to do what they have to do. There was also a report coming from Kyle Hall on Twitter. He covers the Rangers for USA Today and Belly Up Sports. He tweeted that he had asked around and that Trouba, if he is traded, would prefer a team in the Western Conference. One source that Kyle Hall talked to believes that Dallas, Vegas, and Minnesota could be a fit, but that the Rangers would very likely have to retain some of Jacob Trouba's salary. And I'm okay with that. It depends how much they would have to retain, but again, I'm good with trading Jacob Trouba. I'm sorry. I know he's got his fans, but he's just not cutting it anymore, really, in any way, shape, or form. And, the tough part about this, too, is that if the Rangers trade Jacob Trouba, again, I'm for this move. I do want it to happen. I hope that it will happen. It would have been so much better if they traded him in the offseason, because if you trade him in the offseason, a couple of reasons. First of all, you give the players on your team a little bit of time to digest that news and understand the fact that he's not going to be here, and you're still a couple of weeks and even months away from the start of the season. So, clean slate going into the season. Some players wouldn't be happy about Jacob Trouba being traded, but that's the nature of the business. As I said earlier, players get traded all the time. So the players would have had more time to digest it. It wouldn't be a trade of the captain while everything is in complete turmoil, as it seems to be right now. Again, you're going into the season with a clean slate, and that would have been good. I think even more importantly, though, the biggest reason why it would have been better to trade Jacob Trouba in the offseason, any trade of Jacob Trouba would then create more cap space for the New York Rangers. And all of a sudden, you've got a whole lot more cap room to spend on free agents that were available. Once free agency came and went last season and all the big names were off the board, the point of trading Jacob Trouba wasn't really there anymore. I mean, you could still do it, but if you create all this new cap space, like say the trade went through with the Red Wings and the Red Wings took on $6.5 million of Trouba's cap hit. Well, now going into free agency, if you're the Rangers, you've got $6.5 million more that you could spend on other players. Once free agency came and went, that $6.5 million doesn't really do as much. And if you trade Jacob Trouba now, again, I still think it should happen. There needs to be a shock to the system, to that locker room, but you're limited on what you can do by it. Now, you could always make some trades. You could make another trade in addition to dealing Jacob Trouba, whether that's now or whether that's closer to the trade deadline, if the Rangers turn things around, and you could spend that cap space on other players. But the timing of it just is not ideal at all. It would have been much better to get this done, certainly in the offseason than right now. Better late than never, but it would have been a lot better to trade Jacob Trouba during the offseason than current day here. So, yep, that's the latest on the Jacob Trouba sweepstakes, if you can even call it that. We're going to keep everything rolling just a second. We've talked a lot in our last few episodes about the possibility of trading Jacob Trouba, also the possibility of trading Chris Kreider, because those are the two names that you see at the top of these lists in all these reports by Elliot Friedman and whatnot. So we've talked about them quite a bit, but I'm looking at kind of like a second tier of Ranger players, other guys that I think might possibly get traded. Some of you guys have thrown out some of these names as well. We're going to talk about some of those players in just a second. And at the end of this episode, I'm going to talk about why Peter Laviolette should not be fired. We will do all that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Built Rewards. PSA for anyone who rents. If you haven't heard of Built, you're about to thank me. Earning points on rent is now a reality when you pay your rent through Built. You don't even have to check with your landlord to start earning points that you can use toward flights, hotel stays, fitness classes, and even your next rent payment. Let us break it down for you. There is no cost to join Built, and as a member, you'll earn valuable points on rent and on your everyday spending. Built points can be transferred to your favorite hotels and airlines, and even the ones you haven't heard of. There are over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels and properties around the world you can redeem your Built points toward. Points can also be redeemed toward a future rent payment and unique experiences that only Built members can access. So if you're not earning points on rent, our question is, why not? Start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnhl. That's joinbuilt.com/lockedonnhl. Make sure to use our URL so they know we sent you. Joinbuilt.com/lockedonnhl to start earning points on your rent payments today. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is also brought to you by Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even faster and even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so that you do not have to waste time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. You've got Gametime Picks. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc., all in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Seat views. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It is game time. All right, big shout out to the everydayers as always. Thank you guys as always for tuning into the Locked On New York Ranger podcast. We are going to take a little bit of a break here. We got Thanksgiving coming up. Only 4 episodes this week. I mean, if they do something big, then maybe I can jump back on real quick and record a quick episode, or at least a quick segment. We'll see. But if everything goes as planned, the next episode will be on Friday after the Rangers play their afternoon game on that day. They play at 1 p.m. We'll be back later that day on Friday to discuss whatever happens there. For right now, though, let's go ahead and talk about sort of like a second tier of Ranger players that possibly could be traded. I mean, apparently they're open for business and they're making it known to other GMs around this league that, they'll listen to offers. And the 2 names at the top of that list, as I mentioned earlier, and as we've been talking about here on Locked On Rangers, are, of course, Jacob Trouba and Chris Kreider. We'll see if anything comes to fruition with either or both of those players. But I'm looking now at sort of the second tier of players. And the two that I really look to are Ryan Lindgren and K'Andre Miller. Ryan Lindgren, we'll start with him. I feel like there's a decent amount of Ranger fans that have speculated about this. On paper, it does make some sense. He's on an expiring contract. He will be a free agent after the season. And I think, honestly, whatever somewhat small chance there was that the Rangers might extend Ryan Lindgren beyond this season, I think those chances are basically cooked. He just hasn't played well. There were concerns before this season about how his game is going to age, some very valid concerns, I would say. And it looks like it's already happening. I mean, it's only, I think, 14 or 15 games for Lindgren, but he just hasn't played well. And they've tried some different things. They put him with Fox. They put him with Trouba. I think he was on the third pairing very briefly with Jones or maybe Mancini. It was one or the other. The bottom line, they've moved him around a little bit. They've tried to get him going, and he just hasn't played well. And I just don't think there's any chance. You add the fact that Victor Mancini looks like he could be ready for a full-time NHL role sooner rather than later. I don't see any chance on the planet that Ryan Lindgren is back with this team next season. So for all those reasons, you might think that Ryan Lindgren's on the trade block, and maybe he is. I'm sure Drury would at least field offers if somebody came calling about Ryan Lindgren. But I don't think a trade of Lindgren is all that likely. Couple of reasons. For starters, if you try to move him, it just doesn't feel like anybody would want him right now because all these teams are seeing the same thing that we're seeing. He's just not playing that well. Okay, so that's first and foremost. And for that reason, it doesn't feel like a contending team would be all that interested in Ryan Lindgren because if you're a team that's got designs on competing for and ultimately winning a Stanley Cup this season, you probably have a finite amount. I mean, you do have a finite amount of cap space, but you probably also have a limited amount of cap space. And if you want to add to your team now, a little bit later in the season, sometime before the trade deadline here, you're going to aim bigger than Ryan Lindgren. And that becomes even more true when you consider the fact that Ryan Lindgren carries a $4.5 million cap hit. Now, it's always possible the Rangers could retain some of that salary, but even still, I mean, you're adding to your payroll and you're doing it with a player that just hasn't played that well. It's really just that simple. And as far as a non-contending team looking to acquire Ryan Lindgren, that doesn't really make sense either because, again, you're talking about somebody that's a UFA at the end of this season, is on the last year of his deal, and a non-contending team, like, why would they want Lindgren? The only thing I can think of is if they want to add more toughness to their team and feel confident in their ability that they can sign Ryan Lindgren to a long-term extension, maybe then a team would be interested. I mean, it only takes one, right? It only takes one of the 31 teams to bite, and then maybe you can strike a deal. The other thing, too, that you could throw out there for a non-contending team, maybe they feel like the Rangers can attach a sweetener, whether that's a prospect or a draft pick. I have no interest in doing that. I'm not going to trade Ryan Lindgren away and trade something else along with him just to have him off the team because he's a free agent after this season anyway. This isn't a situation where you've got to unload this bad contract. He'll be gone one way or another after this season ends anyway. So I just don't see the point in giving up a prospect, giving up another high draft pick, just to rid yourself of Ryan Lindgren. If anything, if Lindgren continues to play as poorly as he has, then a healthy scratch, I think that becomes an option at one point or another. And if it just continues to spiral, then maybe he's placed on waivers. If he clears, you send him down to the Wolfpack. I mean, none of this makes me happy talking like this about Ryan Lindgren, because how many pints of blood has this guy spilled on the ice for this New York Ranger team? And he was probably lifted up by the fact that he's been defense partners with Adam Fox for the majority of his NHL career. But so what? He's still held his own. He's still played well over the seasons. But to see this drop off this season has been crazy. But it's rough to see this happen to him because, heart and soul of the team, that's what they called him during the presentation of the Stephen McDonald Extra Effort Award last season. The Rangers have also been a significantly better team record-wise with Ryan Lindgren in the lineup versus him not being in the lineup over the last handful of seasons. But the way he's played right now, look, I think you got to give Lindgren a little bit more time because, again, he has not been a liability in recent seasons. There's times where maybe he hasn't played great, but he certainly hasn't been a liability. He's only played about 14 or 15 games this season. If I'm this coaching staff, I'm giving him a little bit more time to figure it out. And again, I just don't see a trade of Ryan Lindgren. I mean, it's not impossible, but for the reasons I mentioned just a minute ago, I don't think it's really all that likely. What about K'Andre Miller? Is it possible that he could get traded? I think certainly that's something that is on the table. Between Miller, Lindgren, and Trouba, I think there's a very good chance that all three of these guys are gone by opening night next season. Trouba, you can't keep running him out there. If he doesn't get traded, even if he finishes this season with the Rangers, he has to be in the offseason either traded or waived or bought out or something to create some more cap space and do whatever you have to do in the offseason. So he'd be gone for that reason. I think Lindgren, I mean, he's a UFA. It's really just as simple as not offering him a new contract, and I think he walks. Miller, between the three of them, I think Miller would be my top choice as far as most likely, and also my personal choice of who I would most want back on the Rangers of these three players. However, of these three players, I think that Ryan Miller is clearly the one with the most trade value. He's the one that you could actually trade and potentially improve this Ranger team. Because if you do a 1-for-1 trade, you move K'Andre Miller to, whatever team that it might be, and you bring back a defenseman with a different skill set, that could improve the team. Maybe you find somebody that's kind of a rough and tumble defenseman that can add a little bit of toughness and grit to this team, a little bit of energy to this team. If you trade K'Andre Miller for a forward, maybe there's a forward somewhere that also needs a change of scenery. You could do that as well. And maybe you give a spark to, this Ranger forward group that just hasn't been cutting it the last handful of games here. But you look at K'Andre Miller, right now he's making $3.87 million. After this season, he is a restricted free agent with arbitration rights. And depending on whichever team acquires him, they might feel like they can handle whatever K'Andre Miller's cap hit will be in future seasons beyond this one. You got to remember, K'Andre Miller's only 24 years old. He has had some success in this league. There's times where he shows flashes where it looks like he's going to reach that next level and become a really top quality defenseman in the NHL. I do think teams would be interested in K'Andre Miller if he became available. This isn't a situation like with certainly Trouba and probably Lindgren as well, where you would have to attach a sweetener to move them off of this team. I think K'Andre Miller could get you something back in exchange for him. And another question that I have to ask here, there's other teams that might be interested in signing K'Andre Miller after this season and would trade for him now for the opportunity to do just that. But are the Rangers interested in keeping K'Andre Miller long-term after this season? That could go either way. That's a question that I think, at a certain point, it's going to be answered because after this season, either Miller sticks around or he doesn't. But even if the Rangers do have some interest in bringing K'Andre Miller back after this season, do they think it will be worth whatever K'Andre Miller commands as a restricted free agent with arbitration rights? They might not feel that way. They might like him a little bit, but they might be at the point, the Rangers that is, that they no longer see K'Andre Miller as an essential part of this team going forward. And if you would have told me that 3 years ago, I would have thought you were crazy. At that point, K'Andre Miller was in the second year of his NHL career. The Rangers were in the playoffs. He was he was one of the better players for the Rangers during that playoff run. Certainly one of the best defensemen, looking like a budding superstar. And at best, over the season since then, the last two seasons and now, the first chunk of this season here, he has plateaued at best. And I think you can make a pretty strong case that he's regressed. 3 years ago, it looked like the sky was the limit. Now, I'm just not sure where things are going with K'Andre Miller. There's not nearly enough physicality. His offensive skills have seemed to have evaporated. I don't know what's going on there. He doesn't even seem like he can handle the puck. Tons of giveaways. It's not good. It's not good. And somebody that just plays too passively for his frame. Somebody that does not throw his weight around the way that he's capable of. One more point that I'll make on K'Andre Miller here. And I think it's something that I mentioned briefly in a recent episode, but I'll talk about it here too. Coming into this season, I looked at the Rangers free agents. We all do this. We all go, it used to be cap friendly. Puckpedia is kind of my website of choice now for this. But you always do this as a fan, or a lot of us do anyway. You look at upcoming unrestricted free agents and restricted free agents and arbitration eligible free agents. And wow, that guy's still signed for another 5 years. And that guy's going to be a free agent in a couple of years. Wonder what his next contract is going to look like. We all do this. Coming into this season, you look at the list of free agents, UFAs and RFAs all put together. To me, coming into this year, we had the big three. The big three very clearly were Igor Shesterkin, Alexis Lafreniere, and K'Andre Miller. Igor, that's a whole saga in and of itself that we've talked about quite a bit on here. We'll discuss that in a future episode as well. I'm sure we'll circle back to that sooner or later. Alexis Lafreniere, it's a done deal, 7-year extension. I think a really nice deal for Lafreniere and the Rangers. K'Andre Miller was my third of the big three. We are now at a point where I don't think he's in the big three anymore. I think Kaapo Kakko has replaced K'Andre Miller in the big three as it pertains to Ranger free agents after this season. I see Kaapo Kakko as a much more valuable piece to this Ranger team right now. Now, if you look at his scoring, over the years, even this year, it doesn't overwhelm you. But this guy is going out there and playing a consistent brand of hardworking hockey. He's fighting for pucks. He's grinding. Everybody that plays with Capo Caco right now plays better, whether it's Cooley, whether it's Riley Smith. Riley Smith just had one of his better games, I think, in quite some time. He was on line with Capo Caco. Brodzinski, I thought, looked good. Probably a couple other guys that I'm forgetting. Veazey, I thought, he played on the third line the one night. He did fine. Edstrom looked fine last night. Whoever's with Caco seems to get an uptick in their play. So I'm going Caco, man. I'm going Caco over K'Andre Miller right now. That is not something that I ever thought I would be saying 20 games into the season, but that's where I'm at right now. I think Caco is more important to this Ranger future than K'Andre Miller is. One more name that I'll throw out there as an honorable mention, or dishonorable mention, depending on how you look at it, is Riley Smith. He's, as far as guys that could be traded, he's on a one-year deal. He's 33 years old, and I don't know. He's done okay, but he's just so okay. He'll contribute here and there. 11 points in 20 games, only 3 goals. It's nothing special. He's not doing anything to, destroy the Rangers' chances of winning games, but he's not really been a net positive either. He's just kind of there, like I've said. I feel like the reason it won't happen, though, is because in the offseason, Drury traded a second-round pick in 2027 and a conditional fifth-round pick next year to a division rival team in the Penguins to bring in Riley Smith. I don't see how he can now flip him to another team and possibly save face from that. So I don't think Smith will be traded for that reason. In just a second, going to shift our attention to Peter Laviolette. Some Ranger fans not too happy with him right now. I'm going to talk about why, under no circumstances, should the Rangers be considering making a trade as far as head coach is concerned. We'll do that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by our very good friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check back to see the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up today's episode with something of a vote of confidence in Peter Laviolette. What this is more than a vote of confidence, though, this is my stance that there's no way, that the Rangers should be considering any kind of a move to their head coach. And I don't think they are, and I don't think they will. Let me get that out of the way first and foremost. But you do see some chatter on Ranger Twitter once you get through all the negative tweets, myself included, about Trouba, about Mika, about Kreider, about Lindgren, about just the overall effort that this team is putting forth in the last handful of games here. You do see, a little smattering of Ranger fans that are not happy with Peter Laviolette, and they think he should be gone. You can't do this. You can't do this. You are in a situation now. Let's say the Rangers actually did this. I don't think they will again, and I definitely don't think they should. If they fire Peter Laviolette right now, or in the next week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever, you are now in a situation where, as a franchise, you would be on your 4th head coach in the last 5 seasons. That's unheard of. Has that ever happened? Like genuine question, has that ever happened? And I'm not talking about like interim coaches, because sometimes you'll see a coach get fired at the end of the season and somebody will step in there and be the interim coach for, the last 5 or 6 games, whatever it might be. That doesn't count. I'm talking like bona fide, this guy was hired to be the head coach of this NHL team. I can't imagine that maybe it has. There's some dysfunctional franchises out there. We know that. But 4 head coaches in less than 5 full seasons, that would be utter insanity. It would be wild. And something else that I got to point out here, for anybody that wants Laviolette gone, I can't help but marvel at all the similarities between what happened with Gerard Gallant and what's happening with Peter Laviolette right here and right now. Gerard Gallant, first year as the Ranger coach. Okay, Quinn's out of here. All the players are happy. The fans seem to be happy too. And the Rangers start winning. Now, Igor Shesterkin, that was his video game-like season, and he carried the Rangers for chunks of that season. But the Rangers also played very well. They earned everything that they got. And against all odds, this team that was supposedly still rebuilding makes it all the way to the Eastern Conference Final and even gets a 2-0 lead in the series against the two-time defending Stanley Cup champion Tampa Bay Lightning. What happens the following year? Well, for some reason, right around this time in the NHL calendar, too, I'm pretty sure everything went south in November that year. The Rangers just fall apart and start losing. And it's not just like a losing streak. As I mentioned recently, we saw the Rangers go on a losing streak last January. I felt like they would pull themselves out of it, though. But the one that they're currently on right now and the one that they had 2 years ago with Gerard Gallant in what turned out to be his second and final season as Ranger head coach feel very similar. There's a lack of fight. There's a lack of energy. There's just a lack of purpose, a lack of focus, whatever it might be. And so many players just playing light years beyond the standards that they've set for themselves. And so with that being the case, again, I just marvel at the similarities between these two situations because the same thing is basically happening with Peter Laviolette right now. Awesome first season, best record in the NHL. He got some career seasons out of a lot of different players up and down this roster, guys that have been here, guys that were kind of new to the team, veterans, young guys, forwards, defensemen, you name it. I mean, guys were playing their tails off last season and heck of a run. I know we want the Stanley Cup, but they made a heck of a run through the Stanley Cup playoffs. They lost to a team that was just a little bit better than them in the Florida Panthers. But now you fast forward to year 2 with Peter Laviolette, and here we are again. The players are mailing it in. That's what it looks like, at least. Now, hey, maybe it's possible. All of us Ranger fans, we're a dramatic bunch at times. I include myself in that as a fan base. I think there's times where, we can overdo it a little bit. That's certainly fair to say. But, I mean, I just don't see how you can look at this right now and want Peter Laviolette thrown kicked to the curb, basically. Because, again, at a certain point, this has to fall on the players. This has to fall on the players. You can't get away with going through 4 coaches in 5 seasons. I'm sorry, you just can't. And hopefully things turn around. It's possible, like I said, we're a dramatic bunch. It's possible that this is a rut and we're all overstating everything and we're all exaggerating how bad things are right now. But, you guys know, the everydayers know, the people that listen to every episode or almost every episode, I tend to be very, very glass half full on this show. Something feels like just really, really off about this team. And with the trade rumors leaking into the media, that's not going to do any favors. The performance that they had last night against the Blues, that was no good either. And the bottom line, I'm not going to put this on the coach. This is on everybody except for the head coach, as far as I'm concerned. Could he do different things? Sure, he could. But there's people that claim that, he doesn't try anything different. He's juggled the lines. He's had guys in and out of the lineup. He moved Capo Caco from right wing to center. They did everything possible to get Mika Zibanejad going. Now, maybe in hindsight, that wasn't the best thing, but the idea that Peter Laviolette never tries anything different, I don't see that either. He's made some adjustments to the second power play unit. I mean, that's at least something. The one thing I do wish that ice time would be skewed in a way that reflects how well or how poorly certain players are playing. Certainly, I would like that. But, you're seeing different guys in and out of the lineup. Brodzinski's been in and out. Matt Rimpey got called back up. And I know when guys go up and down from the NHL and the AHL, that's the GM more so than the coach. But, I mean, they're at least trying different things. They called up Brett Berard, didn't they? He looked good in the first game. They called Matt Rimpey back up. He got sent back down just as quickly, but at least they brought him back up and put him into the lineup. Try to give this team a little bit of a spark. I'm not putting this on Peter Laviolette. That's the bottom line. So figure we can call it there. I want to end with some good news because there hasn't been much of it lately in this last stretch of games for the New York Rangers. Rangers play the Canes on Wednesday. After that game, which hopefully the Rangers can go in there and steal. I mean, I guess crazier things have happened, right? But they're going to have to step it up, play a lot harder than they've played in these last couple of games here. But after the game against the Canes, win or lose, only one of the next 6 Ranger games are against teams that are currently in playoff positioning. After the game against the Canes, the Rangers are at the Flyers, home against the Canadiens, home Devils. That's the one playoff team of the 6 that we're going to mention here. Home Penguins, home Kraken, home Blackhawks. You got to pick it up. You got to win those games, man. I mean, I have been pretty confident that there's no way the Rangers are going to sell. They might retool a little bit and do something to shake this team up and shock the system, as I've been saying. I don't see a full-on fire sale. But, man, if you look at those 6 games there and the Rangers win like 1 or 2 of them, where can you possibly go from there? I think at that point, everything is on the table. But I don't think that'll happen. I think the Rangers will find a way to hopefully at least turn things around and get some points against some teams that they should be beating, pretty handily. So Yep, we'll leave things there for today. Once again, if you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, at @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's at @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.